So this is one of the things that I think is seen as so very, very traditional, particularly over here in the UK, but let's break it down because I also think it's one of the most important roles in a wedding day. Hello lovely couples and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lauren, wedding planner and owner of Bluebird Creative. I provide a weekly dose of wedding planning goodness for the modern couple as well as digital downloads. So guys, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And if you're not following me over on Instagram, then make sure you are at Bluebird_creative, where I provide some real, raw and just some fun. Right guys, this week we are talking about Toastmasters. What do they do? How does it work? Why do we have them? What's the tradition behind it? Let's really break it down. So let's dive into it. Okay, so a Toastmaster, if you don't know what a Toastmaster is also known as the Master of Ceremonies, which I'm not really keen on that saying, to be perfectly honest. I much prefer Toastmaster, but essentially, same thing. So the Toastmaster is the person that will make announcements throughout the wedding day. So traditionally, the Toastmaster is a man in a red suit, and I will get some pictures up for you here. That is very, very traditional, and they will have a very boomy voice. They don't use a microphone. They're usually very proud of the fact that they can project really well and are very good at public speaking. When they are at a wedding, they will really boom and command the space and let the guests know what they need to be doing and when they need to be doing it. Really traditionally, they would also have a table at the wedding breakfast and they would eat their food at that table on their own, which I think is just a bit weird, personally. Anyway, my personal opinion is I'm not overly into, and I'm really sorry if this offends anybody, but I'm not really into the traditional Toastmaster kind. But that is because the weddings that I like to work on are a lot more relaxed. They're a little bit informal, even though they have traditions. My couples are typically very chilled, even though they love beautiful aesthetics and a couple of traditions, but they are more on the chilled, relaxed side of things. And so having a very formal Toastmaster does not work for us. It doesn't fit with my vibe as a brand. It doesn't tend to fit with my couple's vibes, and that's fine. So how does a Toastmaster fit into their wedding day? Do they have one? Should you have one? And what really do they actually do? Let me tell you this, guys. Although I'm not massively into the type of Toastmaster I just explained, I also believe that the Toastmaster is the most important role in a wedding day. No joke. It is so, so important. Unless you want your guests wandering around, not knowing what's going on and not knowing where they need to be going, and your timing is just kind of like getting blurred, then don't have a Toastmaster. That's fine if that's what you want. But if you want people to know what's happening, then definitely get a Toastmaster. So let's break it down. First of all, I'm going to cover what a Toastmaster can do, and then we'll dive into who could be your Toastmaster, where do you find one, and that's not wearing a red coat. So first things first, the Toastmaster will be making the announcements for the day, but you can decide which announcements you want made. So when we're working with our couples, a lot of them actually haven't even remembered the Toastmaster, and we end up bringing it up in our 5-week consultation meeting. And we'll say, who's the Toastmaster? And they'll go, oh, we haven't thought about that. At which point I'm always like, you need a Toastmaster. Here's why. And they're like, oh yes. And we decide who it's going to be and what they're going to announce. So the options are typically that the Toastmaster will kind of step in and start announcements from when it's time to welcome the guests into the wedding breakfast. Basically, a Toastmaster is to stop guests from not knowing what to do and from it just being total chaos. Okay, you do not want to be herding cats because that's what it's like without announcements. They do not need to be overly formal. They can be slightly relaxed, but you do need them. And that's where my couples panic slightly. they think, oh, but I don't want it to be overly formal. And then when we include it in the day, they realise how beneficial it was. It wasn't overly formal. It doesn't need to be a big thing and a big hoo-ha, but the announcements do need to happen. So back to what I was saying. The first one is announcing guests into the wedding breakfast, at which point, when it's time for the guests to make their way through, the Toastmaster should be told by either the wedding coordinator or the event manager at the venue or the catering manager, whoever's kind of managing the day. They should liaise with the Toastmaster. It will typically be the catering manager at this point if you don't have a wedding coordinator. And they will tell the Toastmaster or ask them to do the announcement. And the announcement might be something really simple along the lines of, ladies and gentlemen, will you please start making your way through for the wedding breakfast? Simple as that. It doesn't have to be complicated. They just need to really project so that everybody hears them. They may need to do another one if people are dilly-dallying, because as I said, herding cats. So that's the first announcement. Then you may wish to be announced as the bride and groom, groom, whichever it is for you guys. You may wish to be announced into the wedding breakfast yourself. No joke, guys, this is my favourite part of a wedding day right now. I freaking love it. The announcement in, everyone's so excited because this is your real moment as you're coming in as a married couple, and that's exciting. So the Toastmaster will make that announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please be upstanding to welcome the new Mr. and Mrs. whatever your names are. Or this is where you need to decide. Do you want Mr. and Mrs.? Do you want to be announced as the newlyweds? Do you want to be announced as the bride and groom? Or again, whichever's relevant to you. You can choose. I've never had a couple go by their first names, but I have a lot of couples choose the bride and groom or the newlyweds because they actually haven't decided on who's taking the names and how that's working. So that's an interesting one. But either way, they'll be announced in, at which point the guests just, usually the napkins are going, it's super fun, and we typically have a piece of music that the couple have chosen as well, which goes on as soon as the announcement's been done. Best part. I freaking love it. So that's the next announcement. Then the Toastmaster would announce the speeches. This works really nicely. Not all couples choose to have the Toastmaster announcing the speeches, but I think it just makes things seamless. It works really well. So at this point, they would grab the mic, if you're having a microphone, and they would say, ladies and gents, it's now time for the speeches. I'm going to hand over to father of the bride for the first speech, or to get the speeches started or whatever. I mean, you can kind of go into it. They can do a little skit if they want to. They don't have to. And then they would hand it over to typically or traditionally the father of the bride. But you know me, guys, you do you, however you're doing your speeches, or whoever's doing speeches, that's fine. At which point you then need to make the decision. Do you want the Toastmaster to announce each speaker, or are they only announcing just the speeches? So they're just doing that initial announcement, and then say you were having traditional speeches just for ease here, then the father of the bride would then hand over to the groom, and the groom would then hand over to the best man. Simples. At which point you may want to hand back to the Toastmaster to, if the speeches were at the end of the wedding breakfast, the Toastmaster would then ask the guests to leave the space and move on to the cocktail hour or whatever's happening next. So again, the Toastmaster is the person that is making the announcements to let the guests know what's happening and where they need to go. If the Toastmaster is announcing each speech, they would announce the first one, it would go back to them, they would announce the second one. Typically, if you're doing that, it's somebody that's very confident on the mic, and they might be doing a bit of a skit in between each one. They'll probably know each person really well, and they can do kind of a little bit of an intro into each person, so definitely consider that. The next point that the Toastmaster is going to announce, I already mentioned, which is moving the guests from the wedding breakfast through to wherever it is they're going to go next. They also announce the cake cutting. So at whichever point you're doing that in your wedding day, they will ask everybody to make their way over, because the bride and groom or the newlyweds, or, you know, again, however you want to be announced, are cutting the cake. You may decide you don't want everyone to watch you cutting the cake, and that's fine. You might not be cutting a cake, in which case you don't need that announcement. And then the final announcement is the first dance, but typically the DJ or the band will announce this and ask the guests to come through. That's usually an easier option to go for that. They've got the mic, they're all set up, it brings everybody through to that space. But again, you've got the options. If you're having any extras that your guests need to be aware of, for example, sparkler shots, then you're going to need to have the Toastmaster make any announcements for that. Everybody please go outside, you know, that kind of thing. Again, if you're having a confetti shot earlier on in the day, it would be handy if the Toastmaster could make an announcement for guests to get in a line or whatever. That's if you're not having it back down the aisle, so it's ever so slightly different. And the photographer typically at that point is usually amazing and letting guests know what they need to do so that they can get the shot, because that's what that's about typically. So there we go, guys. That is what a Toastmaster does. That's how it works. Those are the things that they can announce. And then when it comes to who you could choose to be your Toastmaster, if you don't want the man in the red coat, then it's actually just choosing somebody that's going to be at the wedding. So you may have, if you have a wedding coordinator, for example, we offer this as one of our services that's just included in coordination. We don't do it at all our weddings, but if our couples aren't sure of who else to ask, then they'll ask us to do it, and that's absolutely fine. If you've got a guest or a family member or part of the wedding party that you think would be really good at that role, then choose them. It's a nice way of incorporating someone into your wedding day if you haven't already done so, or just sort of elevating a groomsman, for example. But please, please, please bear in mind, if you are choosing a Toastmaster, make sure that they are confident at speaking in public. Make sure that they can project and they aren't quiet. We've had people hand over to Toastmasters and they're just really quiet. They can't project. Nobody can hear them. We've then had to step in or find a microphone. And typically you don't use a microphone for all these announcements. So it needs to be somebody confident. I would also advise, just to bear in mind, choosing someone that you know is not going to get too excited at the bar prior to all these announcements needing to be made, because I have experienced some situations where that has come into play. So there we go, guys. I hope you found this video helpful. Hopefully lots of little bits of advice and tips there just for you to kind of run through and work out what's the best option for you. But please, please, please do consider having a Toastmaster. I honestly think it's really vital to having a smooth wedding day. Have an amazing week, guys. I will be back next week with some more wedding planning goodness. Until then, see you later.